But, even Newcastle, in small towns, it's not like today where if I want to go to Farmville, I don't drive to Oshawa. The local community is for the local.
Right.
And same like with us with a restaurant. Mm-hmm. And I will say, when people speak about me, and I'm humbled about that, I'm more when they speak about Mom. There's a history there. Mm-hmm. My dad came over in 1911.
Okay, wow.
He was 22, born in China, and it wasn't uncommon at that time where you have, and that's probably like the high top, or here in Mobile, the Cedos, the Chows, where it was so poor. Well, and you see that now, with migrants and asylum seekers and leaving war-torn countries and coming to Canada or other, if you want to call it first world countries, for a better life. And just coincident, last year I did I shouldn't say a lot of speaking, I was speaking about the Chinese Exclusion Act because it was the 100th anniversary. 1923 and repealed in 1947, but last year was the 100th anniversary. So I had a chance to speak about that because obviously my dad was caught up in that. Because if he did have a wife, which I don't know, his parents, brothers, he couldn't bring them over. They thought the head tax could be enough to dissuade any Chinese coming over, but somehow they were able to pay the $500. Mom came over in 52, and I'm only assuming it was arranged marriage because they never talked about it. If I did ask, they didn't want to talk and they didn't pry, and I, at that time, was a teenager, and it was all about me, not about them and my history. And my dad passed away in 73. Well, no, when my dad had me, it was in the 60s.
Right.
That my dad was a big, imposing man. So, if you were at the back of the snug, when you go to the back, John has a little history there. And my dad was a big, imposing man. And, but like most anything else, my Mom was the dutiful housewife who stayed in the background. And so, when Dad passed away, Mom couldn't speak English very well, but she ran a restaurant for another 10 years. And she could have moved to Toronto, disappeared in Chinatown, but she chose to stay in Newcastle. And, if I want to call that the elder ladies, they would gather for their coffee and they were sort of bringing Mom into the fold. And Mom had her church. And if she got busy, they would hop back and help her. And when she sold in 1983, and you're going to remember, we almost had that for 30 years. Wow. Then Mom had her routine. She lived pretty close to downtown. I don't know how well you know Newcastle, but the old liquor store. Mm-hmm. She lived 2 doors up from there, and she could walk, go to the IGA, and back then, if she bought groceries, they would deliver.
Yeah.
She'd go into the bank, update her bank book every day, make sure she's getting her interest or whatever, walk to the post office, we had a post office, and she had a routine, and everybody knew. And I'll say this, and it's funny, when you look on Facebook, the endearing thing when people comment about a restaurant, they talk about Mama Woo. Mm-hmm. And that's the way they thought my mom. I was trying to think back in 2006, 2007 when I was on council. Nicholas Kung, who writes for the Toronto Star, did an article, and he said I was the visible minority on council. Visible minority. Sort of the first time that that ever. I guess you're right. And I worked at Goodyear down here, and the guys were saying, "Willie, who's this visible minority?" That's the way my colleagues, my co-workers thought. Willie's just Willie.
Yeah, and you've been here your whole life, right?
Yeah. Well, went to school in Toronto, came back, worked at General Motors, moved to Toronto, and that was an exciting period. I guess any young guy. My girlfriend at that time worked at St. Kitts, so I followed her up there. Had a little apartment downtown Toronto, Wellesley and Church. I needed a job. So back then there was a Toronto Star, you flip through, trying to find a job. And I worked at the Four Seasons.
Amazing.
I don't know if you know anything about the Four Seasons, but it was at Yorkville and Cumberland and Avenue Road. And I was in the fitness attendant. And some of the people that I did meet was amazing. But you know, you meet these people, and it was a lot of fun. And the owner, Isidore Sharp, what a great businessman, hotelier. At that time it was owned by Eddie Creed and Murray Koffler, who started Shoppers Drug Mart. It was that group. Now it's owned by Bill Gates. And Isidore Sharp is a 10% owner, but he's the managing partner, big as Bill Gates.
Yeah.
It's just another thing that he owns.
Right.
And then I went to work for Volkswagen. And then when we were expecting our second child, in '84 we moved back to Newcastle. So, and then that's where I've been ever since. But you know, that little time, it was interesting. You know, when you're young, the big city.
Yeah.
Bought our first house. We always called it Upper Beaches, but it was Coxwell Gerard. And 50,000, 16% interest rate.
Ooh, that was a nasty time.
Well, we didn't know anything different at that time, but you're right. I don't think things are any different other than, you know, I mean, I can obviously say, you know, I was probably paycheck to paycheck, and I think a lot of people, the only thing is when I'll use the term Salvation Army modern, you know, you might have had an apple crate as your coffee table or something like that.
Your Toronto years must have been interesting. Like, did you feel like that was an opportunity to explore, like, living in a town that actually had a Chinese community? Did you actually dive into the Chinese community when you were in Toronto?
No, not really, no.
Yeah.
You know, I can probably say I'm too westernized.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, we were talking about that yesterday at the Diversity Advisory Committee. And, you know, I look at myself, and people have written books about that. I'm like a banana boy. I'm yellow on the outside, white on the inside. Or, you know, CBC, Chinese born Canadian, which I am.
Yeah.
But, you know, I will say, you know, in growing up, no, if you know the stuff, we lived at the back. So, you know, if you look at it, there is a two-story, and I slept in the same room with Dad, and my sister slept in the same room with Mom. It's just the way it was. And like I said, none of us had a pot to pee in. I look at now and, you know, and don't get me wrong, and I somehow just maybe basically understand those that are living sort of, probably not as bad as encampments, but we still have it. My sister has it in the garage, unless she sold it, a Quebec stove. We used to put coal, and then Dad got a little heater, and at that time it was Superior propane, so it was propane gas. But it was supposed to heat, but upstairs, you know, I can remember it had probably 10 layers of clothes on, just to keep warm. But we never didn't know any different.
Right.
It was just the way it was. And, you know, I think back, you know, you look, if my friends came over and my parents were speaking Chinese, you know, I'd be embarrassed. You know, at the front we would be serving the fried rice and chicken balls, but at the back we were eating authentic Chinese food. You know, so, you know, you wet your chopsticks, and that was pretty new. That's normal in Newcastle. But, you know, chopstick, and I'd be embarrassed, and I look back, and what did I have to be embarrassed about?